Hey, welcome to Gaming Without Parole. Across from me is Bryan Paul.
And across from me, the ever illustrious Mike Zelda.
Yep, still staying strong. So this is part 2 of our 2-part TurboGrafx episode.
The fly is still in the room.
It's
weird, like he's right behind me.
It's
It's
Jeff Goldblum.
It's like my past. It's creeping up behind me. It's going to overtake me.
The ever-present specter of death leering over all of our shoulders.
It took me a second on the Jeff Goldblum thing. Yeah. The fly.
Yes. Yeah.
Mike, what are we doing this week?
Didn't I just say that? We're covering this. They were going to talk about turbo stuff.
Oh, yeah. I was totally listening.
Yeah, you were distracted by the fly.
I was. Craziness.
Yeah, well, we had touched at the very end of our last episode. We just touched upon the CD attachment for the turbo, and unlike just a little bit more on that, unlike say the Sega CD, where you can have a pretty solid Genesis experience without the Sega CD. I mean, there's some good stuff on the Sega CD, but it's far from a vital component.
Sure.
You really need the CD attachment for the TurboGrafx to get that system's full experience. I mean, it much more robustly supported that CD add-on.
Oddly, the great thing about their CD add-on is that, strangely, very few FMV games.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think because it predated that technology in a lot of ways. It predated. I think the technology was still simpler, so they didn't really have the capacity to go into all of that stuff.
Because we did get a few, right? We got 2 Sherlock Holmes games.
Yeah.
We got J.B. Harold Murder Club.
Yeah.
And we got It Came from the Desert. That classic
wasn't
Cinemaware game.
Was it? There was a Sega game that had a parody in it called "It Came for Dessert." I think.
Oh, really? Yeah, that sounds maybe familiar.
Yeah,
but
it was just this big fat guy with like a sundae on it, like this crazy look on his face.
I think those might be all of the U.S. released full motion video games. Which thank you very much for that.
Yeah, no, it's like really good. Like you were saying, a lot of the Sega stuff was pretty shitty, but most of the Turbo stuff was pretty spot on.
Yeah,
there was a lot of really good CD games.
I do want to talk about CD games, but I do want to talk first about.
Fine.
About. We're all over the place, so
yeah.
Bear with us. We mentioned last week about Bloody Wolf being their answer to Contra.
Yeah.
But what about Utopia?
Yeah, that perhaps. Well,
maybe not an answer so much as a
shameless ripoff. Yeah,
exactly.
Next to that Golden Axe game, which was really, really a ripoff of Zelda, the top-down Golden Axe one, Utopia is probably the most blatant Zelda clone in existence.
But it's so good.
I couldn't really get much of anywhere in that game. I mean, it's okay, but maybe I didn't give it enough time.
Yeah, you have to go into it being like, this is Zelda for the TurboGrafx.
Yeah.
And there's a sequel.
It's a very pretty game.
It is. Very pretty. The sequel is, I think, just as good.
Yeah. The sequel gets a little more colorful and isn't quite... It gets a little bit more personality. It's not just like, oh, it's not Zelda, don't worry.
And you can walk in 8 directions instead of just the 4.
Yeah, that is nice.
It is nice. And they're not the only ones that ripped off Zelda.
Oh, yeah, no, of course not.
Golden Axe Warrior.
Yeah, that one's
even
definitely
Axe
the worst.
Battler is like Zelda 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, good games. Good games. What about... See, I'm totally avoiding the CD topic. See if I can get all these out of the way first.
We can bounce around.
Well, let's bounce around then. What do you got?
Well, as far as CD games go, I think the big one that sold the system when it first came out was Ys.
Yes.
Ys Book 1 and 2, which is such a weird... It's fascinating that that's what sold the CD system, because it's such a lo-fi game in a lot of ways. There's a few little pseudo anime cutscenes, but the graphics themselves are very basic. I mean, it was originally a PC game.
Yep.
There's no you just run into your enemies. Like,
right?
there's no combat animation. You just plow through everybody.
And I remember getting real irritated the first time I played it, because I didn't know that that's what you had to do. And when I figured it out, I was like, are you kidding me? but it's oddly satisfying.
It is. It's that same kind of feel that Half Minute Hero taps into later. When you really get down to it, all of this extra shit that they put in RPGs is pretty arbitrary. We really just like pressing buttons and seeing the numbers go up.
The numbers going up, exactly.
Yeah.
Because when you're just like on the map and running around and killing random bad guys, you can see your XP going up.
Yeah.
And you're just like, man, I'm just gonna grind for like another hour. I'm just gonna grind for an hour and watch that bar go up and before I go back to the dungeon and do what I gotta do.
Yeah.
That is such a good game though.
Yeah, and there's an item that you can pick up fairly early on that regenerates your health pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So you can kind of, as long as you don't get swarmed, you can kind of just keep going with that grinding.
Yeah. It's super frustrating to have that item and still die because you're like, why did I do it? Why did I
so dumb.
Yeah, you blame yourself a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because it does have one of those very old school RPG traits, which is if you're not at a certain level, you can't even touch some of the boss. Like, you won't be able to do any damage to the bosses until you're at a certain level. So grinding is very much a part of that experience.
But at least it's fun.
It is.
There's been many a game that I've played where grinding is not fun at all.
Yeah, well, it strips it down. You know, you're not waiting like 15 seconds for the battle to load and then another 5 per animate. Like, you just zip.
Good music.
Yes, and that's really, I think, where the CD drive sold itself, was that music it's awesome. It's classic, prog rock the whole way. So you really get into these zen moments as you're just zipping around the map.
Also relatively short games.
Mm-hmm.
If it wasn't for the grinding, I think you could blast through both of them in about 2 hours, right?
It's technically a compilation. It's technically 2 games.
Yeah.
There's Ys 1 and Ys 2 put together. They were, originally PC games, and they just bundled them.
Yeah. I believe they came out in Japan for the NES on 2 separate carts.
Did they? Yeah.
Probably wrong. Do you remember Shapeshifter? Okay,
no.
So this is a strange one, right? Because this reminds me a lot of like Castlevania 2.
Okay.
Right? Except you're a person who can transform into all these different beasts.
Okay. Sound a little bit like Dragon's Curse, the Wonder Boy game.
Yeah. If you were to play it, you would never make that comparison because it feels heavy like a Castlevania game, whereas Wonder Boy games feel pretty bouncy and light.
Yeah.
But the graphics, I think, are really nice on this game. The voice acting should have never happened, but it gets mixed reviews because it's really hard to get into. But once you get into it, I think it's a lot of fun. There'll be some gameplay footage here so that you can check it out for yourself. It's not a lot of fun to talk about a game that both people haven't played.
Well, it's funny because you said that about the Mad Wizard a couple weeks ago about how, because I tried to play that game and I'm like, I don't think I'm really enjoying this. But you said the same thing, like you have to get over that initial barrier of entry and then.
What about Riot Zone?
Maybe that was the one that I was thinking of. Is that a?
It's a brawler.
Oh, it's a brawler.
It looks like a fucking Final Fight ripoff. Like even the main character looks like Cody.
I don't think I've played that one.
Cody's the blonde guy, right?
Yeah, Cody Guy is the ninja guy.
Yeah,
and then everybody knows Mike Hager.
Yeah. Riot Zone, not a good game. Although, again, if you had a TurboGrafx CD and that was it, well, then you couldn't play Final Fight.
Yeah.
So this was their answer. And like I said, not a good game, but that's totally a lie. It's a good game. It just doesn't differentiate itself from the Final Fights of the world.
Yeah. Well, when you mentioned Bloody Wolf, what I was originally when you mentioned that a week ago now,
I know what you're thinking of. Final Zone 2, probably.
I was actually what I was thinking of when you mentioned Riot Zone.
No. Bloody Wolf.
No, I was thinking of Last Alert.
Yes. Oh, and I always get Last Alert and Final Zone confused.
There's so much. Yeah. See, we don't know what we're talking about.
Two generic games.
Yeah.
Okay.
Last Alert is such a weird game. I got it just randomly with the system. This was not something that I sought out.
It's worth something, you know.
It's got some generic looking Rambo guy on the cover. It looks super generic and lame.
Is this the one with the god awful voice acting.
Yes.
I love this game.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, this is the epitome of, like, when people get all excited about cheesy old video games, like, this is what they're talking about. This is totally the equivalent of, like, B horror movie of video games. Yeah. It's a shooter. It's a top-down shooter. It's kind of like Commando, Contra, that type deal. Very Rambo-esque. I think it opens with your whole squad, except for you, getting murdered essentially in Vietnam. But it also has this bizarre anime aesthetic.
Yep.
It's just very. It's got a very weird tone. Like it's very kind of cartoony and goofy. It feels like old 80s anime when you're playing it, and it's got, you know, pretty solid music and mechanics too.
Yeah. Strange title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, terrible voice acting, very cheesy and ridiculous.
Yeah, I think I don't think it's a bad game. I think the voice acting is what makes it an amazing game.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's like that Gamera 2000. Like, that would be a pretty okay game on its own, but with the shitty voice acting, and it's so much better.
Now I'm really confused because now I don't remember what Final Zone 2 is.
Yeah.
They all kind of run together.
Yeah, all that stuff.
Generic names. Let's see. Talked about that. Oh, jeez. You mentioned Splatterhouse.
Yes.
Strangely, is this the only place console-wise to find Splatterhouse?
I believe the original Splatterhouse, unless you're going to go Japanese. I think some of those systems, like the FM Towns Marty or those weird things, have ports. But I think for US gamers, if you want to play Splatterhouse on a console, and not, it was eventually bundled with the remake, the Splatterhouse.
That's
remake.
Right. So on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360,
yes.
if you buy Splatterhouse,
20 years later,
right? Which actually, very divisive game.
Yeah.
I like.
Yeah.
Quite a bit. I couldn't platinum it because of a glitch.
Nice.
But yeah, you can unlock all 3 original Splatterhouse games, and that's probably the way to play it.
Yeah. But it's a very solid port on the Turbo. The only thing that they changed that is kind of a bummer is because of copyright issues, they changed the hockey mask to this weird like red blood mask, which I guess I can see it if that breaks the experience for you. But
you can still get the Japanese version.
You can. The Japanese version has the hockey mask because they're a lot more loosey-goosey with their copyright laws.
Obviously, yeah.
But a just fascinatingly visceral, brutal video game.
Controls pretty poorly. Rick feels like a tank.
Yeah, I know. I just dumped on China, or last week I dumped on China Warrior a lot. Yep. It's not really that different in that regard.
Your attacks, you can duck and do a ducking kick. You can punch, or you can jump and do an attack, and that is pretty much it. You can pick up like
some weapons.
Like there's like a 2x4.
Yeah,
and there's guns. But
I think a meat cleaver, or is that the second one?
I don't know.
I think there's a meat cleaver.
Those run together for me too. It's hard to recommend this game because it was an early example of the kind of games that I like now, which are like the dark, spooky games.
Yeah.
Dealing with supernatural stuff.
There wasn't really a lot else on consoles like it at the time. I mean, because it's very gory. Like, even by our own standards, I would say even compared to something like Doom, which has a little bit more. The gore is a little bit more cartoony. I mean, it's kind of grody. Yeah. It's a very dark, dingy, nasty kind of gore. And the controls are not great, but it's still a very viscerally satisfying game, and you can get through most of it in like 25 minutes, I would say. So,
this is another one where it's really hard.
Yeah.
If you know what you're doing, you could probably blast through it in 25 minutes, but every time I've picked this game up, I struggle to get to like the 3rd level. Because I remember once. I think you drop into the sewer on the 2nd level, and there are these spiked balls that come at you, and just learning how to jump properly to kind of, it's real difficult.
Yeah,
I'm like, dude, why can't you just sidestep?
Yeah, it's like a lot of old brawlers where they felt the need to put in some kind of little platforming elements and just implemented them so poorly. You know, like there's a couple of pits in the game that you have to jump over to, and those are way more harrowing than any of the monsters that you're fighting because it's so, and not quite pixel perfect, but you have to be you have to get the feel of the scrolling a lot better than in other parts of the game.
Yeah. Going back to the CD drive for a minute, this is one of the only places outside of a PC where you can play Loom.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you've been watching any of our episodes, then you might know that Loom is one of my top 5 video games of all time. And
classic LucasArts adventure.
Yeah.
Actually, it's classic in a technical sense, but I think compared to, say, Monkey Island or Maniac Mansion that came out around the same time, not really as well known or
not as well known,
held to the same regard.
Yeah. It was. I'm sort of glad that it's not as well known because Maniac Mansion, was so big and the fans demanded a sequel and they got one. Same holds true for a lot of those games, and this one was special on its own.
Yeah,
and I'm glad it remained a unique title. Unfortunately, and this totally sucks, that the disc access time really kills the experience. I've tried to play through on the TurboGrafx CD, and it looks pretty nice. And it's all really well done, but just because of the technology, it's not that much fun to play.
Yeah, that's the same problem with the Sega CD port of Monkey Island, isn't it? There's just like brutal loading times.
Yeah, and even worse, the Sega CD version of The Adventures of Willie Beamish.
Yeah,
which is just painfully slow to play.
Yeah,
I played that on a PC and can't do it any other way. I don't want to take control. What do you got?
Yeah,
next?
no. I'm just kind of bouncing around. I got all sorts of stuff to talk about. One fascinating game, which I haven't had as much, I didn't get to spend as much time with because I bought it right before my system broke.
Yeah.
Was Exile.
Okay.
Which is a really quirky action RPG. One of the few that's set in a decidedly Middle Eastern setting, starring like definitely Muslim characters. I mean, they deal, well, some of it got censored for the U.S. release, but in the original versions, it is very much your character is an Islamic assassin, basically. You interact with Christian characters throughout the game, both in positive and negative ways. You deal with the Middle Eastern, political structure. It's really pretty fascinating and a bit more mature for an RPG compared to a lot of the stuff that was coming out around the same time.
Was it brought here by Working Designs?
It was, yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The first one is generally held in pretty high regard. Is still considered a solid game. The second one,
Wicked Phenomenon.
Yeah, is considered by a lot of people to be like Exhibit A, why Working Design sucks, which, I think you and I both feel totally the opposite. We're both big Working Designs fans. But it's a game that was, when it was brought over, they tweaked the difficulty in a way that it's basically impossible. I mean, anywhere you go, anybody that you talk to is like, this is a game that is almost completely impossible to finish because it's just so hard.
Yeah.
And it's funny, if you read any interviews with Victor Ireland, people are like, oh, you fucked this game up because you have to meddle all the time with the code. You can't just leave it alone. This is one actually where Victor Ireland will admit a mistake, although it's not the mistake that you'd think.
Oh, God.
He said that what happened was they had been tweaking the difficulty, and they felt like it was too easy. So however the coding of the game worked, there was like a difficulty slider, and they had it set to arbitrarily, we'll say like a 5, and they're like, this is a little too easy, let's bump it up to a 6. For whatever reason, that worked in the code, like however the code was constructed, that just ballooned the difficulty, and it came back, and they were so close to like. He had assumed this would just be this tiny little tweak, so they were like set to go gold, and they didn't have time to go back and adjust it. So he's just like, "Well, we're screwed. Sorry, everybody."
So for all eternity.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was Wicked Phenomenon.
Yeah, although Exile is again, a lot of the Turbo games are ports from Japanese PCs, and the Exile games are the same way. I think Exile is technically Exile 2, and there was an original PC one that was like balls to the wall crazy, that had like time traveling and had you like fighting the president of the United States on a skateboard, and like really bizarre.
Where's that game?
Yeah, which you would not get from playing Exile or Wicked Phenomenon.
Right.
But Wicked Phenomenon also, I mean, that's a very frustrating story with the difficulty, but even the Japanese version, it's not a great game. They like retconned a bunch of the story elements from the first game in ways that didn't make sense. They added in a bunch of other playable characters that are not as much fun as the hero. So it's kind of an interesting gaming curio, but perhaps not as much of a loss to the hobby as we might think. You can also get the Japanese version. The funny thing is, because it's working designs, because it was a very limited release, because of all the weird history, it's super expensive on the secondary market.
Oh yeah.
You can get the Japanese one for like $1 though. So right. And it's a better game. You can actually finish it
if you can understand.
Yeah.
That's unfortunately when we talk about the PC Engine next episode. I think that's going to be the distinguishing caveat between should I play this or shouldn't I?
Yeah.
How much Japanese do I need to know? Working Designs also brought out another game, and it's one of my favorites for the system, Kadash.
Okay. I'm totally blanking on that. That name sounds familiar.
And God, I hope it's Working Designs. You'll see behind me. Correction if I screwed up. Kadash it was an arcade game, and you could pick from 3 different characters, I believe. There was like the warrior, the sorcerer, like that kind of stuff. And it was a side-scrolling 2D platforming action game. And what was great about this is that you could just grind to your heart's content. Like you play through the entire game, never be forced to grind. But that would obviously affect how difficult the boss battles were when you got there. So if you
you know what? I do know the game you're talking about. That is Working Designs. I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Right. I can picture like their logo on the cover. Yeah. And it's just the whole game is just so well done. It's so tight. It just makes so much sense. Yeah. And it's almost like it's also available on the Sega Genesis, but the art style is dramatically different, and I think the PC Engine, the TurboGrafx got the better of the 2 ports. But that's every time I play Kadash, if that's how it's pronounced, I go to the first dungeon. And I just walk back and forth. And I just kill an enemy here, walk back, kill enemy here. And they drop like these little white bags. And like that's your money and XP or whatever. And I just do that for an hour. Because I know that I'm going to do that 1 or 2 more times in the game. And the whole game's going to get way easier. Yeah. It's almost like you could die. But it's sort of like if you're willing to put the time in early, then you'll be rewarded later on. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of like Earthbound. You know, if you grind at the very beginning of Earthbound, you basically never have to do it again for the rest of the game.
Maybe that was my problem with Earthbound, because I was dying a lot.
Yeah, the beginning it's definitely, outside of a few little moments, it's definitely a lot more front-loaded with the difficulty.
Good to know. One of these days.
Someday.
One of these days I'll go back. It's on my long list, not my short list. I don't have a short list. Ninja Spirit.
Yep. It's a pretty fun arcadey game.
Yeah. So cool. Ninja Spirit, as you can see, is a great like Ninja Gaiden type of game.
A little bit more. It's got a little bit more of an arcade feel to it.
There's no jumping off of walls and
stuff.
Ninja
Gaiden's definitely the platformer. It feels more like, say, Mario or Mega Man X, where Ninja Spirit, because there's several games.
Too many.
Ninja Spirit is a bit more like Contra, but you're a ninja with swords.
Yeah, it can be very, very hard.
Yeah,
but it's very cool. It was an early game to. One of the power-ups was to actually create shadows of yourself.
That's Ninja Gaiden. That's very like Ninja Gaiden.
Did Ninja Gaiden do it first?
I don't think so. I'm gonna assume that Ninja Spirit. I think that game was earlier, right? Ninja Spirits.
I don't know. No idea.
Yeah.
Like, but yeah, you could create shadows of yourself and up to, so you could have your character and then two others following behind you, and every time you attacked, they attacked as well, and you can create like this almost like a barrier, like just pushing ahead slowly. It was and then the boss battles were just fucking monumental.
Yeah. It was one of those games where as long as you never died, it got progressively easier.
Yes.
And then as soon as you died once, you were screwed.
Start the game over.
Might as well just turn it off.
Yeah. That is definitely the problem with that game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I've beaten it.
Really?
I think so. But at this point in my life, I don't know if that means I've beaten it with an emulator or not. You're next.
I am.
Yeah.
I don't have too many left. But one of my favorite games that I just kind of came across randomly was, we haven't talked about a lot of shooters like you said, but it is a shooter, Soldier Blade. There is just something about Soldier Blade. It's part of the is it the Soldier series? There's like two. There's the Soldier series and the Blade series, and they're very similar games. But for me, it's the kind of epitome of that series. It's got great, prog rock music. The power-ups work really well. It doesn't do that obnoxious stuff where if you get killed once, you're like totally SOL.
Yeah.
It's got great graphics. It's just, for me, it's one of the games that really just sums up shoot 'em ups and why they're so much fun.
Was this so I'm actually not, I've heard of it obviously, but I'm not familiar with it. Was this a Hue card or was it a...
It was a Hue card game.
Okay.
Yep. Again, kind of like Arizonk, it's one of those ones that you're like, oh wow, this is a Hue card, not a CD game. That's kind of surprising.
Yeah.
There's some cool stuff. There's a lot of battles with giant robots and not quite the level of animation that say Arizonk had. But just a lot of personality, a lot of just detail put into the graphics and the action.
If we're going to go into the shooter realm, or the shmup realm, as nerds call it, nerds.
we call others nerds as we're hosting our 40 some odd episode.
This is our 43rd episode.
Never mind all the lost episodes.
Nerds. Yeah, those are still around.
Yeah, yep. Someday.
Well, maybe. What are your thoughts on the Gates of Thunder and Lords of Thunder series?
Awesome.
Yeah.
The Gates of Thunder in the US was only released as part of that bundle, right? It was a pack-in. Man, remember pack-in games? Although they've kind of started to come back, pack-in games.
A little bit, but not at launch.
No.
Which I guess... Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, when they were trying to unload those turbo systems, you were getting like 6 different pack-in games.
Because on this specific one, it was Bonk 1 and 2.
Yeah, Bonk 1 and 2 and Gates of Thunder.
Gates of Thunder, and then there was also, if you put in a certain code...
Oh, yeah, there was
Bomberman?
Bomberman,
Is that right?
Some little knockoff of Bomberman.
So you had 4 pretty awesome games.
Yeah.
All on one CD.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I loved Gate of... Is it Gate or Gates?
I think it's Gates.
Gates of Thunder.
Who knows?
But
maybe Gate.
Lords of Thunder, though, for me, is the epitome of that. That's such a great game. It's this weird combo, like fantasy shoot 'em up RPG thing. It's very
with blaring guitars.
Yeah, it's until Brutal Legend came out, Lords of Thunder was, to my mind, the most metal of games.
That's awesome.
When you load it up, it's just got this like, there's like thundery sky as the title like flashes in, and this guitar shreds. It's so metal.
Yep. And very similar to Arizonk. It's got the multi-layered parallax scrolling, but it's got like obviously like that darker look to it. It doesn't have that cartoony feel.
Yeah, it's a CD game, so it's got more oomph behind it.
Yeah. It's both of these games. I can't distinguish one from the other because I haven't spent enough time with either one to know which one's which. But I mean, if I'm going to go play a shooter, that's what I'm going to play. Yeah,
Lords of Thunder is a phenomenal game. and it's there's like a shop that you can go into between levels to power up your guy. You've got a melee attack. You can actually land.
Right.
Like if you're flying, if there's ground under you, you can land and start running. And like if you get up close to guys, it's like a metal slug. You'll just start whacking at them with your sword instead of shooting at them.
It's crazy.
Yeah. It's the U.S. artwork is all like what's his name? That guy that does all the barbarian artwork looking things.
I know.
Yeah,
I can picture his artwork.
I'm totally blanking on his name.
Sorry.
We'll put it. Yeah, we'll put it in.
Yeah,
but it's all that like very Western style barbarians. If you look at the Japanese art, it's almost the weird like Nausicaa bug kind of fantasy stuff. It's very, very odd.
Love Nausicaa.
Yeah. But it's excellent game. One of my favorites for the system.
2 cute-em-ups, we'll call them. Magical Chase.
Yeah.
Probably the most expensive. You could buy either my apartment or you could buy this game. But if you bought the apartment, you'd have money left over. Unbelievably expensive.
Yeah.
Here's my deal. Magical Chase and Cotton, Fantastic Nights, whatever it's called. They look very similar.
Yeah.
They're both like you're a girl on a broom, right?
Yep.
And that's all. And they're both cute 'em up shooters. Can you distinguish between these games for people like me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because one of them was made by Quest, which went on to make Ogre Battle and Final Fantasy Tactics.
I'm assuming Magical
Chase
was made by Quest.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good pedigree.
Yeah. Quest did some really random ass games before they went into all the ogre stuff. Because they did was a Conquest of the Crystal Castle too, which is this very odd
NES game. Kind of a Mega Man ripoff, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
almost more like
level.
almost more like a Wizards and Warriors kind of deal. There were shops you could power up your guy. There were these weird like news broadcasts between levels. Very very odd.
Okay,
Magical Chase is also one of those games that even back when I got into this, I mean, it was very expensive even back then. I don't think this game has been less than probably like $400 in years and years. It was one of those games that everybody was like, oh, it's pretty good, but it's not worth anywhere near that. I mean, what game could be worth thousands of dollars? But it's not a game I think that warrants the obsession with it, compared to say something like a Radiant Silvergun where you're playing it and you're like, wow, this game is awesome.
Yeah.
I haven't got the impression that Magical Chase elicits that response from people.
I agree. I've watched numerous reviews on it.
Yeah.
Try to figure out like what the appeal is. I think the appeal is just it's limited print run.
It's rare and it's pretty good.
Was it the last game ever made for the TurboGrafx?
I don't know. It was a Hue card, right? That wasn't a CD game. Yeah. I don't know about that one.
But then Cotton, which is actually a series that prevailed.
It kept going for a while. They're not still making those, although somebody still owns the rights because they get ported every once in a while, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, there's one I'll say as recently as like the Dreamcast.
Yeah. I mean, that's
still a while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I've played a little more of Cotton. I don't know. It's all.
Yeah. Little witches shooting and stuff. The one thing about Magical Chase, the U.S. release actually got gussied up a little bit compared to the Japanese one. They put some more detail into the graphics. They changed some of the enemies to make them a little more interesting.
Nice.
So
good to know.
Yeah.
Because that was probably, I mean, the death of the TurboGrafx was probably already, had come and gone.
Yeah. You gotta wonder what it's like for when you're releasing games like that and you put in extra effort. Like, what do you hope to accomplish? Right. I mean, I'm certainly not gonna fault anybody for ever putting more effort into their work, but
yeah, like it's not going to cause extra people to buy it.
Yeah.
It might give the game a better reception.
Yeah.
But it's like having a reception at a funeral.
Yeah. You got anything left? Because I think I'm dry.
I do actually. You mentioned Conquest of the Crystal Palace or Kingdom or whatever the
Castle. I think it's called.
It's Indiana Jones in the.
Oh yeah.
No, I'm just Kingdom of the crystal skull. Shockman.
Yes.
Shockman was another late release, which was a blatant Mega Man ripoff.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's
doesn't control all that well. It's actually Shockman 2.
Yep.
In Japan. We never got the first one, luckily, because that controls even worse.
Yeah, that doesn't look very good. I've played quite a bit of Shockman, but not the Japanese one.
What do you think of the controls? Because before you answer, I have a recollection of, I think, the second level. You're chasing after this boss character, right? But you're jumping from rooftop to rooftop, and I just remember jumping in the jump button not responding at certain points, where I was like jumping from rooftop to rooftop and be like clearly pushing jump, falling off the edge of the building, happening hundreds of times, being like, it's not me anymore, it's the game.
I don't remember that, although I do remember I got pretty far in that game one time. There is a auto-scrolling submarine level, kind of halfway to 2/3 of the way through the game. I've never been able to get past that. It's just so brutally hard. It becomes a shoot 'em up, one-hit kills, and a lot of it is just meant like it does the shitty thing with shooters or auto-scrolling where if you don't know that like a wall's gonna collapse or you're gonna like you'll start going down a tunnel and then it'll just dead end.
Memorization.
Yeah, it's just rote memorization and it's not fun. I enjoyed what I played of Shockman other than that one level.
Yeah.
So
I'll have to go back and give it another shot.
Yeah. They had a sequel that we also did not get, Shockman 3, or was it Shubibi Man, or whatever they call it.
Yeah. Which is drastically different. Have you ever played it?
It's a little more arcadey, isn't it?
More arcadey. The characters have evolved
big.
from and all the enemies are big.
Yeah, it's a very pretty game.
It is technical showpiece, and the cinemas are nice. In my opinion, infinitely better than either of the first two games. And I've played quite a bit of the first one. Man, it's rough, but there's something there.
Yeah. There was actually another game for Nintendo's the Satellaview, their download service. They had a Shockman that was kind of like a reboot, I guess, not related to the story of the previous 3 games.
Yeah, I do have that somewhere. BS Cartman.
Yeah.
BS Cartman. What is that?
BS Cartman. It's the knockoff of that South Park character.
It's very similar to the Shockman games. Well, I don't know how similar, I guess. I was going to say, we got the Wonder Boy series.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, there's a similar vibe, maybe.
But none of them were actually called Wonder Boy.
Yeah.
Like on the Genesis and Sega Master System, it was Wonder Boy. It was like
Dragon's Curse was one of them, wasn't it?
Right. It was so we, instead of having it be like Wonder Boy in Monster World or Wonder Boy in Monster Lair, it was Dragon's Curse, and it didn't reference it was from any other series.
Yeah.
Which was a totally solid game.
Yeah, I think the Wonder Boy series holds the title of most messed up series because it originally Adventure Island. Yeah, it was
a mess.
Yeah, but it was called. I think it was called Wonder Boy then, but one group owned the rights to the game design and one group owned the rights to the name.
Right.
And so they broke apart, and Hudson went off and made Adventure Island, and whatever the other company was went off and made Wonder Boy. Although it's interesting, if you look at the last Adventure Island games, they come back around to they were the more arcadey ones. Wonder Boy was the more like Metroid-y, Castlevania, exploratory platformers. Eventually, Adventure Island came back around to be pretty much that same thing.
I think Adventure Island 4 on the NES.
And Super Adventure Island 2 was also kind of that same thing.
Yeah. Other than Dragon's Curse being like just, I mean, it looked really nice. It scrolled really smoothly. I know I say that a lot, but like sometimes these games didn't. And it felt really good, and it was like it was just awesome to transform into the dragon and then be like, wait, I have to play a game as a dragon, and it was a great concept, and it felt right at home on the TurboGrafx. A really meaty game, and then later in the series, on the TurboGrafx, we got the Dynastic Hero.
Yep, which is like an arcade game kind of deal, isn't it? You're like the bug people. It's a little more arcadey.
I don't know why am I drawing a blank now?
That's also one of the super expensive games.
Right, which I have a reproduction of.
Nice.
So as far as arcadey Wonder Boy games go, there is Wonder Boy. There's a Monster Layer, and that's super arcadey. That is like I'm pretty sure everything auto scrolls from left to right, and sometimes you're running as your character and jumping, and sometimes you're like flying in something and it's a shooter, and it's crazy. We need to wrap this up very soon. I see a blinking light over there.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
All right. Well, I was going to talk about Jackie Chan's Action Kung Fu and Beeg's Tactical Gladiator, and that's, I think, it. And,
yeah.
But you know what? I really didn't have much to say about those anyway.
Yeah.
It's time to wrap this thing up.
It is. It's time to boat that bass.
We'll definitely give the PC Engine a shot next week.
Yeah. We'll see if we have anything to say.
Yeah.
Can't talk about
I'm
this.
actually surprised how much we had to say about TurboGrafx, so I'm sure we can shit out a half an hour on the PC Engine.
Yeah, yeah. So, without further ado, I've been Mike Zeller.
And I'm still Bryan Paul.
Still. Someday you'll be a real boy.
I'm Jeremy King.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Goodbye.